process is obviously important.
Yeah.
And especially in larger organizations. Why is that one of the 9 core competencies?
Yeah, because ultimately, for organizations, for businesses to evolve into companies, what you fundamentally have is, you have these organizations that go through these stages of development, and ultimately they're consistently doing something, right? They are serving a human or a collection of humans with either a product and or service, and they're doing it repeatedly. And so to do that, there's all these processes, right, behind the scenes that puts that thing or that service into someone's hands. And as as you think about it, in the beginning stages of a company, the processes really are not really that important for a whole host of reasons, not the least of which is in stage 1 and stage 2, you're just figuring stuff out. And so, spending a lot of time worrying about processes just makes no bloody sense. You're trying to get product market fit. You're all working together. It's a very tightly knit group of people. Having things sort of being implicit versus explicit works just fine, right? But as the organization evolves through the stages and you get into stages 3 and then stages 4 and then stages 5, the importance of processes just becomes, higher and higher and higher and higher. The reality is that we all have scarce resources, whether it's time or money, and just investing in process early on doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense. But ultimately, if we don't have good processes, specifically around things that we're repeatedly doing, then we're recreating the wheel every single day. It's a waste of energy. It's a waste of time. And in particular, sort of when it's processes that are involving your, folks at Stratum 1 or Stratum 2 in particular, because that's where all the repeating activities are taking place. If they don't know what to do and why they're doing the things and haven't been trained on how to do the things, then that's not fair to them. And it's not fair to the other people who are dependent upon them, because guess what? All these processes kind of become somewhat connected. Sometimes the processes are within, a core function, and other times the processes go across core functions. And I don't know what percentage of the time, what percentage of core processes are impacting more than one core function, but the vast majority are.
When you get into the ripple effects,
yeah,
it's going to impact.
Yeah, six degrees of bacon.
Yeah. So we talk about there's the staged component.
Yes,
and then there's the vertical part of that.
Yeah, and there's even a horizontal part of this,
yes.
Right? So as a company evolves, it not only, as it goes through the stages of development, it not only starts to stack hierarchies of competencies, right? Level 1 work and level 2 work and level 3 work and level 4 work, level 5 work, but it also becomes more and more specialized across the organization. So you go from 3 core functions, sales, marketing, and customer success being one core function, operations being one core function, and accounting and finance being one core function, to all of a sudden, where we got before we went to the C-suite, we had 11 core functions, and we had 4 levels of work. And so there's a lot going on there. And in particular, right, making sure that the work at the level 1 work and the level 2 work were being done in a way so that everybody was feeling like, we're all working well together. I tend to use sports metaphors, right? But if I turn right to pass the ball or I turn left to pass the ball, being an old rugby player, the people are there that you expect them to be.
Yeah, and it comes back to trust.
Yeah.
Right. So I know that we need to have everybody, if there's a team of 5 people doing basically the same thing,
right,
similar seats, then
or same seat,
or right, same role.
Yeah.
We need to make sure that they're all doing things pretty much the same way.
Yeah.
Right, following the same processes.
Yeah.
And if we have somebody else on a different team who is reliant on that other team, right, for example, in onboarding,
yes,
it's important
yeah.
that people across the different teams know exactly what the other people are doing.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if someone's doing one thing, someone's doing something else, or they're changing what they're doing, that's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, exactly. If you're dependent upon a group of people for the same thing and they're all doing it differently, right? So that'll blow your brain after a while.
It's a little different, but kind of the same things. I had one professor in college who defined a term differently than all of my other professors.
Right.
And most of the class, or half the class, got the question wrong in the exam. And I had a very, tense discussion with him in front of the class about why you can't do that.
Right.
Because if I have, and this was over 2 schools, right? When I was in one of those investment formulas.
Right.
If I have 4 professors tell me it means one thing and the internet says it means that thing, but you have a different opinion, I can't value what you're doing, or what your opinion. I can understand what your philosophy is on it, but I'm not going to take that seriously. And I can't remember your thing versus everyone else's thing. Because if everyone else is following that process and doing things the same way, and you're being an outlier and doing something differently, that's not fair to in that case, the class, but that's not fair to, in this situation, it's not fair to the organization that you want to do something.
You want to be unique to be unique.
Yeah.
Right. Because we're playing a game together.
And we would appreciate an organization. We appreciate the feedback of, hey, I think we could do things differently. Yeah. But at the end of the day, we all have to agree on the process. We have to agree on what everything means like that.
I mean, another good, real quick example of that would be, let's just say you've got a professional football team. You've got 2 quarterbacks. And Omaha means one thing for one of them and another thing for another one of them. How's the line going to deal? How are they going to deal with that? Right. So sometimes we have to have processes defined so that we can all work well together. Right.
So, and if you have 2 quarterbacks and one's a dual threat and one's a pro style, right? In some situations, it's going to be good because you can tailor the offense to different situations. But you're not going to have a championship winning team with 2 different styles of quarterbacks.
Well, because you lose the benefit of compounding.
Yeah.
Right. Becoming really good at something. And then there's always pros and cons to these things, right? There's always tension between sort of, just sort of super, creative situations and sort of effectiveness versus efficiency, right? Stuff. But just, you have to call out, this is where I need to be efficient. This is where I need to be effective. Right. And when you mix those things up, that creates chaos.
Yeah. Well, and process is the result of exploiting the thing that has already been explored.
Yes.
Right.
Because they're repeating, right? Yeah. We're not documenting processes for things that aren't being repeated. So by definition, processes fall into the realm of efficiency, more about efficiency than about effectiveness.
Bringing it back to structure.
Yeah.
Right. We have our leaders have to go and be more comfortable with that ambiguity and go into that unknown and then, create those processes for the rest of the team.
Right.
And so what is the process
around processes?
Around creating, implementing processes.
Yeah. So first thing, I'm going to go back to it, right? So you have to understand, right, the moment you are in, right? So if you're stage 1 or stage 2, don't worry about processes too much at all, right? When you start to get into stage 3, stage 4, stage 5, it becomes more and more important. And then you'll know that moment when you're struggling with people not consistently doing the things that you need to do in order to be living up to the expectations of either your internal stakeholders or your external stakeholders. So as an example, right, if someone's expecting to buy something of a certain quality and that level of quality is all over the place, you've got a process problem, right? Or if someone's expecting to get a certain quantity delivered and it's all over the place, you've got a process problem. So it gets back to repeatable stuff. So then the question is, let's just say for the sake that we're at sort of stage 3, stage 4, stage 5, where we know we need to be doing things consistently and repeating things and doing it consistently. Then the question is, okay, are these processes that are going to likely be here in 6 months or 9 months or 12 months? And if the answer is yes, now is probably a good time to start thinking about those, to the extent that you are at that moment where this is got to be one of your higher priorities. Because as I've said before, process tends to be one of the last core competencies that people master, right? Because there's just some fundamental things you got to get done before then. But let's just presume for a second now that the organization has evolved to the point where the senior leadership team's sitting here during quarterly or an annual, and they're going, you know what, now's the time we really need to start working on taking our core process competency to the next level. So the first thing is just making sure everybody in the company, everybody at the senior leadership team even agrees on what the core processes are. So you start to create a list. Sometimes that list is 7 core processes. I've seen it over 40 for one of my larger clients that ultimately, raised capital at a unicorn valuation. And so you got to agree on those lists. Once the lists are agreed on, I like people agreeing on the names of the core processes because words matter, so that we all know what we're talking about. And now the question is, okay, how are we going to go about like eating this elephant, because it's a big thing, right? And so what I always recommend is you need to decide if you're going to tackle any of those you're going to tackle starting to document those core processes in the next quarter. And if you are, which departments or core functions just have the capacity to start going there, or which core functions would benefit the most by documenting the core processes. So let's just say, for the sake of this conversation, that you've got 7 departments and 2 of them decide to tackle documenting their core processes for the next quarter. You create a ROC, and then what I like having is the people within that organization, within that core function, the function leader comes back and says, hey guys, we're going to take this on. Maybe it's going to take us 1 quarter, maybe it's going to take us 2 quarters, but let's put together a tiger team and figure out what the steps are. So now, how do people go about figuring out what the steps are? Well, I always like to think about what's the penultimate thing you're doing in producing, right? So let's just say sales. Sales ultimately is, I'm getting a customer. That's my end goal, right? So I want a customer. Let's just say, for the sake of a conversation, it's a business where you get a contract. So the end goal is to have a contract. So what's it take to get to a contract, right? And you work your way step by step by step by step by step by step by step, all the way back to the very beginning, which is identifying an ideal customer. Right? So you say, okay, we agree on an ideal customer. Now we get a list of people. Now we agree this is how we're going to go out and evolve that list into leads and into potential trials and into demos or whatever it is. And you develop these 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 steps to go from identified to closed. And then once you have those, then the next question is, does it make sense to put KPIs on each of those step processes so we understand whether things are going well in our process or not? The KPIs are there to help us understand whether there's an issue in that particular step. Remember, these steps are taking place repeatedly, so multiple people tend to be involved in them. And so, if there are issues, it'll show up in the KPI. And then once the issues show up, the classic question is, all right, what's the issue? Is it we haven't trained people well on this? Is it this step actually makes no bloody sense? Right? Or is it, we've got people who just basically don't like to follow rules and think they can get away with ignoring the steps. But there's usually something going on, and so we need to figure that thing out. And that's really, what we do is we take it, we make sure that we get all these processes. We make sure that we have good KPIs on the steps, in particular in areas where it's really important that we do this consistently, back to efficiency. And then ultimately where I like to get to is I like to have every single one of my core function heads own process mastery and own KPI mastery. Those are 2 separate roles and accountabilities and responsibilities that we have them own. And on a scale of 1 to 10, how strong are your processes within your organization? That doesn't mean how strong have you documented. That's how strong are they working really, really well? Are 90% of the time all the KPIs associated with your core processes, are they green? right? And it's pretty straightforward stuff. And so ultimately, where you want to get to is every single one of your core functions has the right level of processes documented. As I don't think we talked about this, but you don't want to document everything to the 99.99%. It's just a waste of effort for a whole host of reasons, including processes tend to be relatively entropic. What you want to do is sort of document the 20% of the activities that generate 80% of the value, and really focus on those. And so, maybe there's 5, maybe there's 7, 10 steps. It usually doesn't get much further than that, where if that process step is not working well, it's a problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so ultimately, where you want to get to is we've documented everybody's processes. We've developed training materials. They're literally, sort of in 90 in the knowledge sharing tool or in the process tool. You can go in there and see all the training materials. Make sure everybody's trained up on the skills, the competencies they need to be trained up, and make sure the KPIs are in place, and then stand back and, every single 6 months to 12 months, you just might want to check in and just sort of say, hey, our process is working really, really well. Our vision for 90 is within, 1 to 2 years that you don't even have to do that, because we're going to give you
we'll let you know.
We'll let you know, right? Because we have all the you've documented it all. It's in there. The KPIs are in there. And
if you're following that process.
And we can even tell you whether or not you have people processes or training processes, or you have, sort of process deficiencies, right? And then the last thing I'll say on all this is, once again, why is it the last core competency to be mastered? It is hard, number one. And number two, you need to figure out when the cost benefit is there for the documenting of this thing, right? As an example, if you know that you're going to take a group that's, let's just say back in the early days, you have sales, marketing, and customer service, and you're now going to split those 3 things into 3 different core functions. You may want to wait until you now have those 3 core functions. Those leaders are in place. They're getting their act together. Then work on documenting the core processes. If you know something's going to change in 3, 4, 5, 6, 9, maybe months, right, you may want to wait. But if you know we're going to be doing this and we're going to be doing it at least for a year, if not 2 years, if not forever, then it's a no-brainer to the extent that you have the capacity to take that rock on for that quarter.
Yeah. I always think of it as sort of the scaled business routines. There's a lot of things that you do during the day that you don't want to have to think about doing.
Right. Yeah.
Right. It's like making your bed, brush your teeth.
Yeah.
And if you're bringing in people that don't know how to do that, for example, this is not the best analogy, but bringing people that don't know how to do that, you don't want to have to teach them how to brush their teeth every day.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like if you have a child, you teach them to do that. And then once they get it, like, okay, do it.
Right.
You got it.
I trust you.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, but you got to keep doing those things. And
yeah,
if you're doing that every day, it's like, that's not something you want to have to be top of mind. That's not something you should be worried about.
Yeah. We don't worry about whether we put our left leg or our right leg into our pants first. It's just automatic, right? Yeah. And it's those repeating disciplines that ultimately should be pretty automatic, that should be documented.
Right. All comes back to trust.
Yep. Yeah. And then, like I said, ultimately, the last thing we haven't talked a little bit about is we do the training, and then once the training materials are done, just let your department know that, hey, we're going through this process to make sure that we all are on the same page in terms of what our processes are. And we now have them all documented. They're all, in 90. They're all in the knowledge sharing tool. You can go in there and you can make sure that you understand, the processes that not only you're responsible for, but it's helpful for you to understand the processes that are on your left side, right? If you're thinking about it, you take the ball and you pass it, take it from the left person, you pass it to the right. Here are the processes that I'm connected to on my left side and on my right side. So it's flowing from them to me, to someone else. And I just have an appreciation for that. And ultimately, I think that's super healthy for people to understand not just their own thing, but how their thing relates to others. It gives them more context and appreciation for, sort of the nature of the game they're playing.
Yeah, and if you're overwhelmed by the things going on left and right, I can think of some people.
Yeah.
Some coworkers.
Yeah.
Who are in that situation, and those people tend to like creating processes, but
right.
also they need to in order to function.
Right.
And right, because we have a lot of people, project managers, for example, who have to deal with a bunch of things. And
they're like they're their own version of OCD, like I am. Right, there's certain stuff. Right, if it's not reasonably well organized, if there's just too much chaos in front of me, it's not debilitating, right? But it causes friction, it causes anxiety, it causes, us just to be not our best selves. And so, some of us have more needs for process than others. And of course, those people are great to involve in the process of setting up our processes.
You want those people in the right seats, and then that's a whole that's a people thing. And that's also goes back to Colby and all that.
Exactly.
And making sure that they're there. But if it's one of those situations where if you are making things more complex because you're not following a process,
right,
then those complexities are compounding.
Yes.
And then it's really easy to just fall into a mess. And I think it's even more apparent when you see those people go out of office for a little bit.
Right.
And it's like, oh, wow, it's really easy to just kind of slide out of it. Right. And that's when we go back to saying that process is entropic. You have a lot of forces, some good, right? Some where it's like, this is healthy, this is helping it evolve. And then some where it's just a lack of discipline.
Yeah.
And following those things. And then when you add 20 people involved in that whole process, it takes actual work to keep that in order and to keep it together.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything more on process?
I think we're good.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.